It's now time for Issues and Attitudes.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Issues and Attitudes. My name is Jeff Owens, General Manager at WEIU. And my co-host isn't here today, but my guest is here today. She is Mary Fons. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you for having me.
So I appreciate you coming over, and Julia's in the other room. She brought you over from the Mattoon Arts Council. I guess when we introduce you to Mary Fons, for the people who don't know, what would be your title? I was going to say, you're the host of Fons and Porter's Love of Quilting, you're the quilt nerd, you do all this stuff. So how do you describe yourself?
It's really a hard question. It's really a tough question, and I never know how to answer it exactly. But what I can say is that I'm a writer. First and foremost, I've always been a writer. I'm a writer and a speaker. I'm a researcher. And my specialty these days is American quilts and quilt culture. So quilt history and culture is kind of my beat. And because that's the topic that I love and that I'm interested in, I use my skills as I studied theater, and I've done a lot of performance poetry, theater in Chicago, performance art and things. All of those things that I used to do more of in kind of an arts way have all been brought to bear on what I do now in the quilt industry, which is a huge industry. I mean, it's like a $4 billion industry. and people think it's because people are selling quilts, but it's not that. It's these events and, like QuiltCon and the Paducah show in Kentucky. And so there's fabric and there's sewing machines and there's events where people like me come and talk about quilt history, Yeah.
Well, before we get into some of the quilt stuff nationally, let's talk a little bit about what you've done the last couple of days here in our area. I know last night you were at an event at the train depot in Mattoon. How'd that go?
It was great. It was a full house, and that there were a wonderful audience. And what I did was, I like to talk about history. You hear the word history, and you hear the word lecture, and it's like, no thanks. But what I love, I read something, a writer that I really like, Mary Capello, she said a lecture can be really electric. It can be, she said, she called the lecture nonfiction off the page. So if you treat a lecture like a performance, if you are excited about the material, a lecture on history can be fascinating, and even if you're not into quilts, it would be unlikely that someone who wasn't into quilts would come to a quilt history lecture, but sometimes you get dragged along to these things. But it's really about people and art, and so I delivered a lecture on myths in the American quilt story, that the colonists made quilts. They didn't have any fabric. You can't make a scrap quilt unless you have a lot of scraps. They didn't have that. So it's called Myth in the American Quilt Story, and I go through 5 myths, and it was awesome. It was fun.
What was another myth I have to know now? Besides,
well,
give me 2.
Yeah, 2. So another good one that I can say, this is good. I bet a lot of listeners who are quilt people will have heard this one. The idea that quilts that are made with just a needle and thread in your hand, quilts that all the pieces are cut out with scissors, quilts that were made in the good old days. There's this kind of understanding, it's a myth that those quilts are better somehow, like if you don't use a sewing machine, like somehow it's a more authentic quilt, or it's like a better quilt because it took you 9 zillion years. No, it's a myth. We use these wonderful tools now, rotary cutters and sewing machines and lasers. Some of the long arm sewing quilting machines have lasers in them, and our quilts that we make today are 1,000% as legitimate, as special, and as important than as the ones in the old days. I mean, it's like anybody who's ever cut out their fabric pieces with scissors is really happy. They don't have to do it like that always. Sometimes.
Yeah. That's interesting. And you got to see the lift building today in Mattoon?
Incredible. I gotta give it to Mattoon. The Arts Council brought me here 6 years ago to teach quilting. I was teaching actual patchwork. Now I just lecture about it and research and study. But they brought me here, and Julia brought me. It was a great experience. And now I'm back to do this. And I grew up in a small town in Winterset, Iowa. It's great. It's a great place. I love where I'm from. But we didn't have an arts council. And I would have loved something like that. So today I went to the lift building. We didn't have anything like that either. You guys, it's amazing. This facility is beautiful. The kids were engaged. They were into it. And some of them were doing, you've got the students here working at the station sometimes, or learning at the station. They had kids on cameras, learning how to work these cameras that I definitely couldn't do myself. So it's so cool, the opportunities here. I love it.
We're talking to Mary Fons today. Mary, where do you think the the love of quilting and quilts came from? Was it an early age? Can you take us through some of that?
Yeah, it's my mom is a really famous quilter, Fons and Porter. If the show's on, people know her name. And I haven't done the show since I think 2017, or maybe 2018 was the last time I did the show, because I went to grad school. I went to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago to study writing, like for real. I always wanted to do that, so I finally did. But my mom is this famous quilter. Fons and Porter is a name that most quilt people know. But it's scary. Sometimes I'll meet, my husband was interviewing for a job, and I said hello on the Zoom call he was on, and the guy who was interviewing him was like, "Oh, my mom's a quilter." And I always pause, and I get really afraid, because it's like, I want to say, like, well, tell her Mary Fons said hi. She might recognize my name, but what if she doesn't? What if she doesn't? And then Eric, gets the job, and then it's like really awkward. Like, no, my mom didn't know who you are. Anyway, but the Fons and Porter name is one most people will recognize if they've been quilting for a while. And people think that I would have grown up learning how to quilt in quilting, but I did not. Quilts were what my mom did for work. She had the magazine and the TV show and working all the time, single mother.
Yeah.
And so my sisters and I'm the middle daughter, not needing attention or anything. It's the middle daughter, But we did lots of creative things. I was writing, and we did paintings and plays and all this stuff. But we didn't make quilts because it just didn't occur to us to really do it. And then when I was 28, I got married for the first time. Disaster. Doomed. Very bad idea. Never should have done it. I guess I had to learn my lesson. It was over very quickly. And I also, and maybe this contributed to it, but I also got really sick. I had ulcerative colitis and lots of complications with that disease. So I was 28 years old, and my life, kind of fell apart. I mean, it was really a tough time. And I had what I call my quilt epiphany. And
I like that.
And it was when your life is torn into a million pieces. To some of us, quilter people, it makes sense to tear up perfectly good fabric into a million pieces and sew it back together again. And I started making quilts, and I got into it. And I was working as a writer and performer in Chicago, making my living, doing my gigs, doing my stuff. Yeah. But when they were like, "You want to be on your mom's show because you're quilting now and you're like Fons 2.0 and you want to do this?" I was like, heck yeah, I needed the gig. I was like, sure, I'll do it. So I went on the TV show, and I just got more and more into quilting, and it was better money than performing poetry. I did make money performing poetry, but it was a little more stable than that. So I just kept going.
Yeah. And how long the show was ran for a long time on WEIU?
Oh yeah.
So how long has it been in production?
Gosh,
I should ask Mac probably, but
well, I'm trying to think when Mom and Liz did the first episode. I mean, it was in the 90s, late 90s, but yeah. And
if you want to see the show, we air the shows 9 o'clock on WEIU TV. Fons and Porter's Love of Quilting every Saturday at 9. Quilts in history, again, me not being a quilter, obviously, and I was trying to learn as much as I could the last few days. I never thought about quilts being a part of history, but then I go back and I think of some of the shows I like to watch on TV, and they talk about how they have the quilt up in the front room and it's been there for 30 years. So talk about that and some of the things you talk about when you speak to people.
Well, I love, so there's this really famous book called Aunt Jane of Kentucky, and it was written in 18 something, I'm not remembering now, but
67.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you so much. Yeah, you're like,
that's the most famous quilt, right? Or it came out of our book about quilting?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know which book you mean.
But I know there was something about, I remember, yeah.
Yeah, and it would be amazing if you read Aunt Jane of Kentucky in preparation.
I did not do that, I'm sorry.
But anyway, so yeah, I mean, it was around that time. I think it was, maybe toward the beginning of the 20th century anyway. I should have looked it up too. I didn't know I was going to talk about it. But the point is that, it's the story about this old woman. This young woman comes and finds this old woman with her quilts, and the woman tells the story of all of the quilts, and the narrator realizes that when she first saw the quilts, they were just patchwork, they were just blankets. But by the end of the story, she says, no, quilts were history, biography, romance, life, love, sorrow, philosophy. And it was all of these things and more. And that's what I feel about quilts. When you look at them and you look at the history of them, you're really looking at the history of mankind. I mean, people have made quilts, made coverlets for a very, very long time for warmth, but also for recording their history when they couldn't write it down, or keeping the memories alive of people that they loved. And it's also art. quilts are art. There's this distinction between art and craft, and it's dumb. We should get rid of it. I like to say I'm art, craft, non-binary.
I like that.
That's my little joke, yeah. But it's true. They're really, you look at quilts, the whole Industrial Revolution, textiles. The New England cotton mills, this country was really built because of textiles, because we started making our own cloth. We didn't have to import it from England. So it's really the fabric, of the American story, and it's fascinating. Yeah.
Is there a most famous quilt somewhere? I know there's a quilt museum in Nebraska, but talk about some of the most famous quilts out there.
That's good. These are great questions. Oh my God, I love it. You're doing good for a non-quilter, I have to say. And that museum, the International Quilt Museum in Nebraska, I'm on the board of that museum. It is it's amazing. I call it Quilt Church. It's so good. They have 6,000 quilts in their permanent collection, and the exhibits change all the time. And if you can get to Lincoln, you just got to do it. And now you're this quilt person, so now you got to go, right? But some of the most famous quilts, one of them would have to be Harriet Power's Bible quilt. She made two. She was a freed slave, and this was in Georgia, I believe. So she was a freed slave, and she made these two quilts, and they're pictorial. So each section of the quilt tells a story from the Bible. There's not words on it, but there's pictures, Adam and Eve, Jonah and the whale. And they're such cool quilts. They look so cool. And the story, and one's in the Smithsonian now, and one's at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. And the story is that she had to sell them because she had to feed her family. She didn't want to sell these quilts, but she did. And thank God the person she sold them to kept them safe. But that is, every quilt book, is going to talk about Harriet Powers. And then there's one, this is a really good one. In Paducah, Kentucky, I forget, I don't know if it was like 89, maybe 1989, this woman, Carol Breyer Fallard, won Best in Show, and she had machine quilted her quilt. Now, a quilt is 3 layers. It's like the quilt sandwich, we call it. There's the patchwork, right, or the applique, and then there's the stuffing, the batting, and then there's a backing fabric. And it's not a quilt until it's quilted. So the quilt thing, you stitch all the layers together and then you finish the edges. Well, in Paducah, there had never been a quilt that won the Best of Show with someone who had machine quilted.
Okay. And
it was a scandal. My mom was there. It was like, my mom said, people sat down on the curb and cried. They were like, oh, that's the end, that's the end of quilting, they're using machines to quilt their quilts, like it's over. And it's just so fascinating. That quilt is amazing. It's called Corona 2. It's amazing. And the quilting's beautiful. But when technology changes things, there are people who jump on, and there are people who, they're holdouts and they don't want to do it. It's cool, whatever.
And I'm sure there's still holdouts, right?
Yeah. We call them the quilt police.
You said there's QuiltCon now too, like Comic-Con.
QuiltCon, QuiltCon, and I've gone every year since it started in 2013, but I'm not going this year actually. QuiltCon.
Where's it held at?
It goes around to different cities.
Okay.
This year it's in Austin. Oh, I think that's true. But yeah, it goes around and lots and lots of people come.
We're learning about a new something.
Yeah.
And you obviously keep up with technology because you have a show called Quilt Nerd on Twitch.
Yeah.
So talk about that and what you've learned doing that.
Well,
and you do that was perfect. Yeah. You do your show live, much like right now. So you have to go in and you don't really know what's going to happen because you're interacting. So talk about Quilt Nerd.
Well, so the Twitch is a live streaming platform.
Yeah.
You're probably familiar with it, right?
A little bit, yeah.
So it started as a gaming channel. It's twitch.tv. Okay, so Amazon bought it a couple years ago, so it's an Amazon thing. But Twitch was originally for gamers because, and when I learned, I'm 43, so I'm new to a lot of this stuff. When I learned that people liked to watch other people play video games, I was like, you got to be kidding me. And then somebody said, yeah, and little kids like to watch other kids play toys on YouTube. I was like, it's a brave new world. I have no idea. But it turns out it's pretty entertaining to watch people play video games. But Twitch expanded it. Now it's not just video gamers who use the platform. It's a really good platform for live streaming. Really good. It's built for that. So you have violinists who have channels on Twitch and they play live music, violin. There are beer shows, like micro brew shows where they test the beers and they talk about the beer. Lego, people put Legos together and stuff. And podcasts are great for quilters because quilters, they sit in their studio or they sit at their kitchen or their dining room table and they do their stuff and they listen to podcasts. But you can't see anything on a podcast. And with a live stream video show, it's like live television. Yeah. It's live. And I have a screen to play with. And so I show quilts and I talk about them, and the show is different every single time, and it's live, and there's a live chat. And it's wonderful because you're engaging with other quilt nerds, and it's about quilt history, and it's about quilt culture. I don't teach people how to make quilts on Quilt Nerd. It's about quilts. It's not the how, but the why. And when I started it on Twitch, I mean, a lot of people, if I had started it on YouTube, it would be a much bigger show. But I don't like YouTube. The comment sections are terrible. It's so glutted. There's so much content. It's like, how do you even find anything? So I wanted to I'm kind of an alternative chick, you know? Like, I like alternative radio and like, you know. So I did it on Twitch, and I'm so happy to be there. I went to TwitchCon, which is their big conference, and I just loved it. I mean, you've got the nerds for cosplay stuff, and then the video game nerds, and here's this quilt nerd. But it's really great. And I do the show twice a week live, Tuesday nights and Saturday nights. And you go to twitch.tv/quiltnerdshow. And you'll see it, and you can watch some episodes. I love doing it. It's my favorite thing.
So when you go to these events, are you recognized? I mean, a lot of times people go, hey, that's Mary Fons.
I am, you know, and I don't know. I'm kind of I am an introvert. What I like to do is be on stage because it's very clear that I'm here and you're there, and we know our roles here, and so when people recognize me, people, you know, say nice things, and I kind of like close my eyes. I don't know. I'm not a diva like, oh yes, tell me how great I am. I don't know.
Well, one of the things that when I was researching the pop culture of quilts, I never thought I would use those words together, but I learned it. So when you talk, I mean, current like stuff out there right now, I mean, when you talk about Twitch and the things that are attracting younger quilters and younger people to it, what is the pop culture of quilts right now? You know, is there stuff out there?
Yeah, there is. I mean, you do this professionally, so I shouldn't be like, that's a great question, because you do this is what you do. But like, I love these questions; they're so awesome. Thank you. Yeah, the pop culture of quilts right now. Like, first of all, COVID. We were talking about COVID before the show. COVID was good for quilts and sewing. You know, sewing machines. It was hard to find one there in the beginning of the pandemic because everybody wanted to. You know, a lot of us were home and they wanted to do stuff. So quilts became kind of, you know, something people would make. And so when people make stuff, they post on Instagram. Yeah. They post what they're making. They post their projects, things that they're trying out. So Instagram is huge for quilters because, again, it's visual. The Modern Quilt Guild is the new. There's a modern style quilt. It kind of looks like a minimalist painting, or like Joseph Albers or Mark Rothko. Lots of solid colors, lots of squares. Doesn't look like quilts from the past. So the Modern Quilt Guild had a big influence on how people see quilts. And then I got in big trouble. About a year ago. It's just about a year ago.
Uh-oh, breaking news.
It was, yeah. So one of the biggest trends with the quilt pop culture thing was, for a number of years now, people have been cutting up old quilts to make clothes out of. So they'll take these quilts, you know, from the past, right, and cut them up for jackets and dog collars and bib overalls and stuff like that. And this has happened before. It happened in the 80s. Ralph Lauren did it for a hot second. But because social media, these trends get around. And so I was really worried after I was researching for an article about this, quilts in fashion. I just saw so much of it. I mean, I was just like, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of designers who are doing this. We have a problem. And I wanted to say something about it because these clothes were getting tons of press, and everybody was loving these quilt jackets and stuff. And they would say that they only cut up quilts that were busted up. But you look at the clothes and, I mean, nobody wants a jacket where the stuffing's coming out. So these are pretty good-looking quilts that they were cutting up, and I nobody else was really saying anything. So I had to open my big mouth.
Well, what did you say, Mary?
Well, I thought I was being pretty funny, you know. So I made a video. I made a video on YouTube, and I cried in it because I'm just a crier, you know. It's like, this has to stop. And some people were like, "You're my hero, thank you," because like someone had to say something in a big way.
Because they were destroying a little bit of history, right?
Yeah. I mean, and here's the thing: not every quilt's going to go into a museum, of course. Not every quilt's going to make it. I mean, if it's busted, and you put it in the garage to catch the oil when you're doing the oil change. It's okay. But the volume of it, because social media was happening, the volume of it was staggering. Yeah, I mean, it's like, you guys, it's a non-renewable resource. These quilts from the 19th century, and sometimes you cut it up and whatever. But sometimes when it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and all the time, and by the way, you buy one of these quilts for like, I don't know, $100. Some of the jackets were selling for like $3,000. And I'm just like, there's something wrong here. Like I had to say something because I thought if I didn't, I'd be disappointed in myself. That's what it came down to. I was like, Fons, if you see something, you got to say something. And so I did. And it was a controversy within the quilt world because I was very strong, in my opinion. And
but I think there had to be people behind you.
Oh,
though,
yeah.
Because
Oh, yeah,
to
yeah,
me,
yeah.
from just the outside, I'm not saying that because you're our guest today, but
No, yeah.
I mean, I can't stand when I see this history destroyed because you can't ever get it back. So I get it. So you are a rule breaker, but that's okay.
I am. I'm an alternative chick, right? I go on Twitch and I say some stuff that other people weren't saying. And it's it was interesting. I like to say I took a ride on the internet because it's wild. I mean, and that's it's just the way it goes. People can say pretty mean stuff when they're anonymous, but I put my face on camera and I said it with my whole chest. I was not anonymous.
You weren't a keyboard
that's right.
pirate or whatever.
Keyboard warrior or whatever, yeah.
There's a new 10-part docuseries that's coming out called America's Quilt. You're involved a little bit. Talk about that and when and where we'll be able to see that.
I would love to know. I don't know yet.
Okay.
It's not made yet. But I was just talking to somebody in LA, a production company. It's my dream to make a quilt history documentary and make it really good and make it cool, make quilts cool. So the production company I was working with for a long time, we're done working together. I mean, it was amicable. They just decided to move on to a different thing. And so now I talked to somebody in LA who is interested in picking up the project and pitching it to networks. My desire, I love PBS, of course, but I'd really like to get it on a network, like a streaming network, because I want to reach people who aren't watching the shows, the quilt shows already. I want to reach people who might not know, right? The quilts are fascinating.
And you might be able to do both,
absolutely.
Because everything's kind of intertwined.
Absolutely.
As everything is separated, it's hard to come back a little bit with some of the things that you know. Is there a favorite quilt that you made that's like the one that that you're going to keep forever?
Yeah, there is one. There is one that I have. It's called Little Black Dress, and it's really cool. It's a cool quilt. When I was growing up, with Mom, and all of her quilts kind of looked one way. There's a Fons and Porter style, and it's pretty traditional, kind of a country home kind of thing. One of the things about quilts that's interesting is the styles change over time because the styles that we decorate our houses with change. I mean, you think about the 70s, there wasn't that many quilts.
Shag carpeting.
Oh, I'm telling you, avocado green, and that orange and stuff. So quilts that come out of that period look like that. And then you get into the 80s and you got Laura Ashley. I don't know if that means anything to you, but dusty rose and hunter green and all that kind of colors. Well, quilts reflect the way, and it's women mostly, the way women decorate their home and make their quilts look like that. So when I was growing up, I mean, part of the reason I didn't make quilts is Mom's quilts weren't my style. I mean, I was
you knew you had a vision.
That's right. I had to do something different. So one of my favorite quilts is it's got solid black in it. My mom's never made a quilt. Maybe she has lately, but with solid black fabric. But it was those modern quilts, this new kind of style of quilt that was coming out, that made me realize I could do it. And that's it's exactly right. Like how do young adults decorate their house? If they've got the ability, crate and barrel, this kind of minimalist, Pottery Barn and stuff. So the quilts kind of look like that now. But the other favorite quilt that I have, it was really great, and I gave it to a boyfriend, and then we broke up.
Oh.
Well, I mean,
did you ask for it back?
No, no. But I wonder now, I'm like, whoever he's with now, there's no way she's going to let him keep that quilt. I mean, just because it's like, this ex-girlfriend made you a quilt, get rid of it. So who knows where it is now. But it was a good one.
Oh, that's funny. What do people ask you the most when they see you?
Let's see. They ask me the most, do you make your quilts by hand? And what they mean is, do you make them the old-fashioned way?
Yeah.
Like I was saying before, and something kind of dies in their eyes when I'm like, yes, I do make them by hand. I use a sewing machine, But it's funny because you have to use your hands to use a sewing machine. And by 1870, most people in this country either had a sewing machine or they had access to one. So we've been making stuff by hand with a machine for a really long time.
Now, you've been talking a lot about you like to teach and give the speeches and go on the lecture circuit. Do you get time to quilt much anymore or not?
Not that much. But I still love doing it, and I am doing handwork because I'm doing applique, and my favorite quilts are quilts that have animals on them, because there's patchwork where you cut up pieces geometric and stitch them back together, and then there's applique where you ply. You cut out stuff and then you stitch it down, okay, to another piece of fabric. And my favorite quilt's like Harriet Power's Bible quilt. It's got all these scenes from the Bible. Some of the animals, you can't really tell what they are. Whenever there's a quilt where I can't really tell if the animal's like a moose or a dog, maybe a fox, my favorite, because I don't like perfect quilts. I like quilts that look like...
Well, it leaves a little up for the imagination, too.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like when you see the modern art.
Yeah.
What is it?
Right. You get to decide,
You've got a few minutes left
Sure.
from Mary Fons. This is going great. Do you have any what's next? I mean, what do you have upcoming in your crazy schedule?
Well, one of the things that I do, I've been working with Quilt Folk magazine since 2016. I was an editor of Quilt Folk magazine for 2017 through 2021. Quilt Folk is a company that makes beautiful things. Quilt Folk magazine doesn't have ads in it. It comes out 4 times a year. Each issue is 160 pages, and we focus on a different state every issue. So we go and travel and take pictures of quilters. It's wonderful. Quiltfolk.com is amazing stuff. So I'm working on a big project with Quilt Folk that'll be unveiled either late this month or in March that involves old quilts, but we're not cutting them up. We're restoring them. You can say. So that's really cool.
We have a couple minutes left. I want to real quick, while Julie is still here, Mattoon Arts Council. Next month, Craig Titley, who we just had on, by the way,
That's
a couple
awesome.
weeks ago, and then Christina DeLay and Dr. Temple Grandin will be coming up in the Mattoon Arts Council. So you can check that out. Just Google Mattoon Arts Council and get hold of Julia, and she'll set you up. Mary Fons did her demonstration last night. Second time in 6 years you've come up here, so we appreciate it. Let's do some rapid fire, just silly questions, but let's have some fun as we wrap this up because you seem to have that personality. So it'll be good. How many quilts do you own?
I own 12.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Advice to a novice.
Don't let anybody make you feel bad about what you're making. If they make you feel bad or say you're doing it wrong, run away from them.
How often do people try to give you quilts?
Not too often, actually. It's interesting. I don't get offered, no.
I'm going to guess I wrote this question before I met you today, but who was your mentor? I'm going to assume it's your mom,
My
right?
mom, yeah.
Okay. So, what inspires you to quilt now? Like, if you haven't quilted in a while, and is there things out there that inspire you?
It's quilts that I put on my show, Quilt Nerd. I mean, there's so many fascinating things, and I'll see a quilt, I'll be like, yeah, that's my next one. Like, I want to do something like that. It's always quilts from the past. The stuff that's being made today, it's great, but it's the past.
Is there a famous TV or movie quilt that maybe was in the back is there one?
Yeah. Well, there's a game we play on Quilt Nerd. It's called Quilt Spotting. Yeah,
Okay.
Quilt Spotting, and we put on our little Discord server, like anytime we see a quilt in a movie, they're all over the place. I just saw a quilt in 5 Easy Pieces. I don't know if it's my favorite one, but anytime I see a quilt in like Alias Grace or wherever.
Okay.
Yeah.
A good quilt will last how many years?
If you take care of it, it'll last hundreds of years. Keep it out of the light and out of the moisture.
There you go. Favorite part of all the things you do?
Connecting with people.
Okay. 15 seconds left. I'll leave it with you. Anything you want to add?
Watch my show on Twitch. It's really, really fun. Quilt Nerd, go twitch.tv/Quilt Nerd Show.
And watch it on WEIU TV as
That's
well
right,
on
that's
Saturday
right.
mornings.
That's right.
Mary, it's great to meet you. Thanks so much, and I wish you had some energy.
Thanks so much.
Have a great day, everybody. This is WEIU.